Welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast for the Irish Daily Mirror and the Irish Daily Star. I'm Owen Murphy, a news editor, standing in again for Paul Healy, who is on leave. And today is our Week in Crime podcast, where we look back over crime stories of the past 7 days. And today's episode is produced by Andre Skintian. And joining me to discuss everything that has happened is Michael O'Toole, our crime and defence editor. Hello, Mick.
Hello, Owen. How's things?
Very good. It's just starting off with this case down in Waterford. A mother has appeared in court charged with the murder of her 6-year-old son in Waterford. What are the details of this case?
Yeah, as you'll be aware, Owen, we'll have to be careful what we can say. There are limitations, but I think we should mark it. So it's a lady called Ruth Purcell Healy. She's 37 with an address at Bishopsfield in Williamstown in Waterford City. Now, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. She appeared at a special sitting of Waterford District Court on Tuesday night, where she appeared on a single charge of murdering her son, Matthew Healy, who was a 6-year-old child. Now, Detective Sergeant David Shore gave evidence that he arrested her at 6:05 on Tuesday evening. And when he put the charge of murder to her, she replied, "No, thank you." Now, the presiding judge was Judge Kevin Staunton. As you'll know, when someone is charged with murder and appears at the district court does not have any jurisdiction to deal with matters of bail. So Miss Purcell Healy was remanded to Limerick Prison, and she's going to appear in court next Tuesday. That's the 20th of February. So Judge Staunton did ask that a psychiatric evaluation of the accused take place following a request from the defence solicitor, Ken Cunningham. He also directed that the accused receive any medical attention deemed necessary. Now, as you and I are recording this one, we know that Matthew's funeral is taking place in Watergrass Hill today in County Cork, where his father's from. So I think there are quite a lot of people at that today.
Okay, moving on. You broke a big story earlier this week about Kinahan cartel killer Freddie Thompson being in trouble with the law again. What's he accused of doing this time? He's already in jail for murder.
Yes, so he's serving life for the murder of a man called Daithí Douglas, who was one of the up to 18 people killed in the Kinahan and Hutch feud. So he was in the maximum security, Ireland's only maximum security prison, which is Portlaoise Prison in County Laois. He has been investigated, so he's had what they're called P19s, disciplinary procedures. He's causing a lot of trouble in prison, and he's had more than 70 P19s for various infractions, some minor, some serious. But we also know that there has been a Garda investigation, so the prison service has contacted Gardaí, and they've carried out their investigation. And it's our understanding that he is going to appear in court quite soon. I'm not going to say when or where, but very soon, charged with a number of offences: threats to kill, assault, and assault causing harm. Now, they can carry combined, maybe say 10 years. Some of them carry 5 years, some carry 10 years upon conviction. So that is happening very soon. As I said, there's going to be a major security operation. He was moved from Portlaoise Prison, as I say, in Laois, down to Cork Prison last month, but he will be driven to court under really, really heavy security. I would imagine that the emergency response unit of the guards will be involved in this, and the armed support units. It'll be a big operation. Now, here's the interesting aspect. He's serving life. If convicted, he can face up to 10 years. But I was trying to find out, will that be added to his sentence? Because it's an indeterminate sentence, because as we've said, life is indeterminate. It basically is anything. And you have to persuade the parole board to let you out. That could be 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. I think it won't be, if he is convicted, it won't be added. It'll just effectively roll over onto his sentence. But the guidance we're getting is he is a very troublesome prisoner. So irrespective of he gets 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or gets acquitted, because he could, I think it'll still be a very long time before he sees the light of day. He was jailed in August 2018. The murder was in July 2016. So he's already served 6 years on remand and in custody. I think you're easily looking at another 20 years for Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We know a life sentence, by name, it means life, but the average life sentence prisoner spends about 20 years behind bars. So let's say he spends 20 years behind bars. It wouldn't be the case then that he'd spend 20 years behind bars and then this new sentence would kick in and he'd serve another 10 years.
I think it's up to the judge, because I know that judges can make sentences consecutive, but I just wonder, because say if you're serving a 10-year sentence, the judge can say, right, when you're finished that sentence, you're going to start serving your 7-year apprentice. I'm not 100% sure about life. I think that the judge has the power to do that, but I think it's going to be more nuanced than that. It's basically a rolling system, and they're going to look at them, and it's really up to the parole board. But I think, I'll certainly be retired by the time Freddie Thompson can speculate about getting out, to put it that way. And that's not for a couple. I'm not that old.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because if somebody kills, for instance, 2 people and is given a life sentence for those 2 murders, it's not the case that you get 2 life sentences served back to back. It's only 1 life sentence. He can only have 1 life to serve, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Now, we know of one killer who was released from prison on a life sentence. So the way it works is, when you do serve your life sentence, you're released on license, and if you do any infractions, any crimes, you're brought back in. But that killer killed while he was out on license, so he started a life sentence again. So it started again. Basically, it wasn't an activation of the other one. But yes, it is quite complicated. And as I said, I think the judge will have the power to say, right, if he gets parole, I want him to start serving this. I think that's unlikely. I think it'll just be a continuation of his life sentence.
So news of his fresh prosecution, it comes less than a fortnight after he lost his appeal against the conviction of that 2016 murder of Daithí Douglas in South Inner City. So where is he in terms of trying to overturn his actual murder conviction?
Oh, no, that's it. He lost. That was at the Court of Criminal Appeal. No, that was only the 30th of November. I don't think there's been any notification of him. We spoke about Graham Dwyer. He lost his appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeal last year. Then he subsequently went to the Supreme Court, which is currently considering its judgment in that. I presume Thompson has the power to do that, or can request. Dwyer had to ask permission of the Supreme Court to do it on a point of law or a point of public interest. I think Thompson can do that, but I'm not really aware of any major point of law on this, because essentially his appeal was against the use of CCTV evidence against him. And the judges dismissed that. They said it was very strong evidence. So I think that's basically the end of the road. He can go to the Supreme Court. I think that's unlikely, because the Supreme Court doesn't, take every request for an appeal, a final appeal. The Supreme Court's the final court of arbiter in Ireland. So I think that's really done and dusted for Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, so Freddie, obviously very much a serious criminal and has been involved in serious crime by the looks of it for many years. I'm interested in his background. Like, a lot of criminals like him would have had very troubled upbringings, very troubled backgrounds. Do you know much about his background?
Well, he's 43, and he has been a criminal easily for 20, maybe longer years. I think, reading about him, his first convictions were at the age of 15 or 16. So, he was steeped in criminality. He really came to the fore. We obviously know about the Kinahan and Hutch feud, which started in 2015 with the murder of Gary Hutch. Thompson was involved and actually prosecuted his own feud, which we used to call the Drimna Crumlin cocaine wars. So it was him and another mob led by a man called Brian Radigan, and they were at each other. And there were around 15 people killed in that feud. Thompson's gang killed the vast bulk of them. They won that feud, and they killed most of the people there. So that's really came to prominence. But it was only in 2016, he was working for the Kinahan cartel. We know, for example, that Christy Kinahan, the boss of the Kinahan cartel before Daniel took over, really sort of derided Thompson. At one stage, he had him acting as a gardener for one of their properties in Spain on the Costa del Sol. So he was regarded as a bit of a joker, I think, not that serious. But the attack on the Regency in which David Byrne was murdered changed everything. And Daniel Kinahan, who's now the leader of the gang, effectively brought Thompson out into the gang, to the center of the gang, because he knew that Thompson knew how to prosecute a feud. So he was really central when the feud emerged. And we know that He was central to the murder of Daithí Douglas. He didn't pull the trigger. There are other people serving life for that, but he orchestrated it, and he basically organised it, and he was involved in the get out and that sort of thing. But he was central to Daniel Kinahan's plan to take on the Hutch gang and murder innocent people as well. And he was really, really central to that. So he became a very, very important figure within the cartel when the feud erupted.
Yeah. It's interesting. The Gardaí eventually, of course, got that feud between the Kinahans and the Hutches under control. There's an awful lot of them in jail at the moment. One concern is that I presume a lot of them will be due for release soon, and that could reignite the feud. Is that a concern of law enforcement agencies?
The guards do not think the feud is dead. I'll put it that way. There are things going on in the background. I checked this about a year ago because the last murder was in January, February 2018, so 6 years ago. So you'd think that it's dead. Guards don't believe it's dead, but it's definitely moribund. And it's definitely in the doldrums, thank God, because it was really, really vicious for a couple of years. There are serious Kinahan players who are due for release. Some of them are probably getting out any time because there were about 70 Kinahans who were locked up. It was really, really successful operation by the guards, but not every one of them is serving life like Freddie Thompson. Vast bulk of them have got maybe 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, 15 years. So those people will get out, and those people will get out soon, in the next year, maybe in the next couple of years. So you're right. What happens then? I think a lot of them, their cough has been softened by the Garda. Really, really impressive Garda crackdown on the Kinahan cartel. But a lot of them are inveterate criminals. So a lot of them will return to criminality. Now, the Kinahans, as we know, are under pressure. Daniel and Christy and Christopher Jr., they're effectively on the run. They're in Dubai, but the guards are trying to extradite them for, serious offences. So they're under real pressure. Will the cartel probably have the headspace to go after Hutches afterwards? I think that's unlikely, but that's the thing about feuds. It can go like that. It can just explode at any time, and it's all about, we don't know what events will happen when people get out. So look, it is a concern for the guards. They're not taking their foot off the pedal. They've been hugely successful, but who knows what the future brings in this.
Yeah, of course. It was somewhat one-sided, the feud, and that it corresponds with the amount of them in prison. How many Kinahans in jail compared to Hutches?
I think at one stage, there are Kinahans in jail in Ireland, in Britain, and in Spain. So James Quinn, who murdered Gary Hutch, the first murder in the feud, he's in prison in Spain. We know Bomber Cavendish, for example, is in custody in England, and various others. David Byrne is in custody in England, Liam Byrne is in custody in England, awaiting trial for firearms charges and others. So, but most of them are in Dublin. At one stage, there were about 70. Now, some have been released, some will be released. That's a huge amount. I was talking with various other sources before we did this, just trying to think, how many Hutches are there? There is a Hutch wing in Wakefield. Most Kinahans are in Mountjoy prison. Some are in Portlaoise, but most are in Mountjoy. The Hutch people would be in Wheatfield. So you're really talking Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy, who were convicted in relation to the murder of David Byrne, facilitating that murder. Jonathan Dowdall was convicted of that. He's serving his sentence in Limerick prison. I don't think it's fair to say he's part of the Hutch gang, seeing as he gave evidence against Jerry Hutch in that field prosecution. So I don't think we'll consider him. There are other people associated with the Hutch outfit, but it's probably not fair to say that they're part of the Hutch gang and they're not in for Hutch offences or the criminal offences. So the vast bulk of people jailed in connection with the feud and are really, really on the Kinahan side. And I always think of, during one of the Hutch funerals, a family member said, "We're not a cartel, we're a family." And I think that's clear for anybody. The vast bulk of the criminality and the serious criminality in this feud has come from the Kinahan side. There's no doubt about that.
It was quite an impressive feat by the guards to bring it under control, the Kinahan Hutch feud, because, as you mentioned, it was very intense there for a couple of years, murder after murder after murder. It was old-fashioned policing, I presume, that ended it, was it?
A lot of intelligence and lots of intelligence gathering and lots of evidence gathering. But yeah, look, the guards were very much 2015, 2016. I always say this, I think at 2016, at around the Regency and the Kinahan cartel's reaction to the murder of David Byrne, I think it was brazen. And I really do think they were of such a size that they were a direct threat to the authority of the state. And there's no doubt 2015, 2016, the Guards were on the back foot. Now, maybe 2 months after the Regency, I think the Guards started their own counterattack against the Kinahans, and it was very, very successful. So say January 2017, we know that there was a big raid in Rathcoole where a massive Kinahan weapons cache was seized, and there have been loads of arrests, loads of convictions for murder, loads of convictions for firearms offences, criminality. So it has been very successful, but there's no doubt the Guards were on the back foot, but they did win, and they did, concentrate their resources, and they were given an extra 5 million quid. I always remember a week or so after the Regency, the Doug's and Organised Crime Bureau got 5 million quid extra, and that just went straight into overtime, and it led the way in cracking down on this cartel. So it was a successful operation, but it needed to be successful because the Kinahans were such a threat.
Yeah. Just moving on, like, I've always been intrigued by missing persons cases, and there was a big development yesterday in a missing persons case, which I don't know if it's been officially upgraded from missing person yet, but this fascinating story emerging yesterday about this missing Icelandic tourist. His name is Jon Jonsson. It is now feared he was killed before being dumped in a Dublin park. For 5 years, this was a missing persons case. What led to the change?
Well, it hasn't been upgraded. I checked that yesterday because we know, for example, say Deirdre Jacob was upgraded from a missing persons to a murder. And there are various others. Jojo Dullard, for example, is a murder case. This is still classified as a missing persons case. You're right. He went missing in February 2019. He had been at the Bonington Hotel and he'd been playing poker there. Now, we understand he lost a significant amount of money, thousands of euro. Now, Gardaí, and this is the issue. The Guards decided they're searching Santry Domain, Santry Park, just south of the airport and north of the Bonington, so up that way towards the airport. Now, they're using cadaver dogs, they're using the Garda Water Unit, they're using various units. Now, the Guards do not do that lightly. Essentially, the reason for this, they got 2 anonymous letters. One was posted to Ballymun Garda Station. That's the seat of the investigation. Another one was sent to a priest in the Greater Dublin area. I don't know who it is, but priest. But basically, there was enough information in those letters for Gardaí to decide it is worth us searching the domain. There's a wooded area, and there is a lake. Now, it's not the biggest lake, but it's a lake nevertheless.
Yeah, I was thinking about that lake because I didn't think it was a very big lake. So I said, if he is buried in there, it won't take them long to find it. But is it big enough?
Look, it's big enough to hide a body. I'll put it that way. I looked at it yesterday. I'm sure it's deep enough and it's big enough. It doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be Loch Ness or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's a lake and you can put a body in there. But they're also searching a wooded area because it might be a shallow grave. Now, look, there might be nothing there, but I think Gardaí took the decision. We've got this information. It's vague. They want the person who wrote these letters, person or persons who wrote these letters, to contact them again to give more information. But there's a threshold, and they clearly decided that there was enough evidence in those letters and whatever other evidence they have to do that search. And that's not something from experience that they do take lightly. So, there must be a certain level of belief. And obviously, sadly, the suspicion would be that Mr. Jonsson is dead.
Yeah, it's interesting that they obviously took the letters seriously enough. If they only got them yesterday, I think they only got them yesterday. And
no, I don't. I think it was quite a while ago that they got
them. Was it? Okay,
I think so. Yeah,
but obviously they do deem them to be credible to start a search anyway.
Look, that's it. There are. With every missing person, with an awful lot of missing person cases, you do get cranks, you do get people contacting them. But whatever was in this, whatever tallied with the other information they decided, and look, we're not privy to it as ever, we only get scraps. But whatever the information was, they took it seriously. So for me, that's an indication there's a threshold. The Guards do not act on every piece of, anonymous communications they get. So whatever was in that, it was enough for them to go for this.
Okay, so now it's a matter of waiting to see what, if anything, they can unearth from this lake. So they were doing searches yesterday, which was Tuesday, today, which is Wednesday. So do they continue? Are they likely to continue until?
No, I got the sense that it'll be yesterday and today. That might go into tomorrow, Thursday, but really the main crux of it is yesterday and today, Wednesday. So look, it might be called off by the time we finish this. We don't know. I mean, and maybe might get lucky, but just in relation to most missing person cases, they're solved by two things: either intelligence, people coming forward, people saying, "I believe X is there," or happenstance. So do you remember that lady? She was murdered by the IRA and buried in Templetown Beach. She was one of the missing, and her body was found by literally a person out walking their dog. That happens. But, in other cases, say like Fiona Pender, there was a search. She went missing in Offaly, 1997, I think. And a couple of years ago, there was a serious search in a rural part of County Offaly because they had intelligence and a statement to the effect that the suspect said that's where Fiona was buried. And they were very hopeful of finding her remains, but they didn't. So but that's my point, that they get information all the time and they evaluate it. With Fiona Pender, they did a search. With Deirdre Jacob, they did a search on intelligence and information. Nothing happened with that. So it's very frustrating, but sometimes and obviously in this, there's intelligence and evidence, but an awful lot of times it is happenstance. Dog walkers do find bodies, unfortunately.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's the case that many of these remain unsolved forever and a day. I remember one of the first missing persons cases I covered. I thought all missing persons cases were more or less found. Either the person was found, a body was found or something. But I remember the first one I covered was in Strokestown in County Roscommon. And there was this man, he disappeared in the middle of the night. Now, at the time, it was presumed that he may have taken his own life, but there was never any trace of him found. Now it's 5 or 6 years later and still no trace of him found. But there are many, many cases like that throughout the country. There's actually over 800 active missing persons cases in Ireland. Like, we would have had, the majority of missing persons cases are solved, and they're solved very quickly. Maybe they're teenagers who run away or whatever, and then they come back and they're put back into care or whatever it is. But I'm intrigued by the fact that there are over 800 can't be solved.
It's very hard, and there are. You told me that before we came on air. I was really intrigued to know that there are 800 people long term missing. Do you remember there was an appeal there about a couple? I think they were missing 40 years ago, down in Cork. I think their car was found. That's intriguing. Look, unfortunately, as I said earlier, if people don't come forward with information or evidence or make a statement, you're really depending on coincidences and happenstance. And unfortunately, some people are just never found.
Yeah. And I remember there was a top expert from America, former FBI agent, came over to Ireland to try to solve one of the long-term missing persons cases. And I remember he went up to the Dublin Mountains and Wicklow Mountains, and I remember he said to me, this is going to be a hard nut to crack. Like, Ireland is an extraordinarily rural country, and if there's bodies hidden anywhere, it is going to be very hard to find them in an extraordinarily rural country.
Yeah, but I was talking with someone about a civilian about a search for someone who had gone missing, and there were search teams out and everything, and his body was later found in an area, but people had walked. It was wooded, but people had walked maybe 10 feet past it and hadn't found the body, and the body had been there for quite some time. So unless you have really, really specific information, or you get lucky, those people aren't going to be found. And you do think of, say, the disappeared, the Operation Trace women. If it's most likely they're dead. We know several have been upgraded to murder. Their bodies have not been found, and it must be a complete nightmare for families not to have that sense of closure, that they want to give their loved ones a Christian burial. So your heart goes out for them, because they've suffered the loss, but they're being traumatized really every day that the remains aren't found. So it must be a terrible ordeal.
Yeah, it was interesting what you said, that Jon Jonsson's case, that's the Icelandic tourist, that's not yet upgraded from missing persons case to murder case. And I remember having a discussion with one of the cold case detectives in the past, or former cold case detectives, and said, what's the difference between a missing persons investigation and a murder investigation, and why does it matter, and why do you upgrade it and all that? And I think sometimes it's the case that they're upgraded to murder investigations simply because, there is quite a degree of evidence that they were killed unlawfully. But as well as that, what's the difference between a missing persons case and a murder case? There's a lot more resources put into a murder investigation than a missing persons case, isn't there? And that's the big difference, really.
Yeah, look, you can have, in a murder investigation, you could have 60 officers involved, because there's the local units, there are the national units, but you have, Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the photographic section in the Technical Bureau. So it's a very, most murder investigations do have 60 or more officers. So that is a significant operation. And even, we've had some cases where someone has died a violent death, but before it's officially termed a murder, we would say it has all the resources of a murder inquiry, because the guards know which way it's going. So yeah, look, with a missing person, you could have sometimes one guard, sometimes a very small unit, because it's a resources issue. I mean, that's understandable. The guards don't have the resource. Nobody has the resources that they want. So, they have to triage this. So obviously, if it's murder, it is upgraded, and that gets more attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. That brings us on to resources, of course, and the Gardaí is under-resourced, I think it's fair to say, in terms of the amount of officers there are in the country at the moment. But one thing they're trying to do to tackle that is the age limit. So the age limit for joining the Gardaí recently increased from 35 to 50. That's for the first time in the history of the force. Figures released this week suggest it has been a success, that increase in age limit, in terms of getting new officers on board or new trainees on board.
Yes, so it's just finished earlier this month, but there was a recruitment campaign for the Garda Síochána. Now, interestingly, as you say, so it was 35, and then it was raised up to 49, under 50, 39 to 50, basically. Now, the Guards gave some figures this week that there were 6,381 applicants, which is up, because I think it was about 5,000 the last year. But of that, 2,360, which is 37%, were aged between 35 and 49. So obviously, they would not have been able to join up before the age limit was increased. Now, I think privately, Garda bosses would be very happy about this, because we spoke about this in the pod. People were going, if you're over 35, can you be a guard? Can you, are you physically robust enough to be able to chase gougers and all that sort of thing? Well, 2,360 people obviously think they do. So I think there's a bit of relief within the Depot Garda headquarters that so many people have applied, and I think they're very happy about that. So it's the start of the process. There are 3 other steps they have to do: an online test, then they have to do a competency test, then they have to do an interview, and then finally the physical test, which we spoke about last week. So there's still a few hurdles to get over, but I think Garda headquarters are very happy at the response from people aged between 35 and 49.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because we discussed that last week when we were talking about the fitness test that you need to have, and whether or not, as you mentioned, is a 50-year-old guard going to be strong enough to resist or to overcome somebody who's resisting arrest? Is he going to be strong enough to chase criminals down the street? Obviously, the Gardaí believe that a 50-year-old new guard can do jobs like that and can be an addition to the force.
Yes, and the Guards are quite clear about this. When you join Templemore and you're attested after your period, and you become on the regular a frontline uniform Garda, you will be expected to do exactly the same thing that your 25-year-old colleague is doing. It's not as if there'll be any special treatment. If you're a mule, you're a mule. Guards call themselves mules. So that's it. So you will have to do anything. So you will have to pass the physical. Now, it is graded. So a 25-year-old will be expected to be fitter than a 49-year-old. But you will still have to get over that threshold and cross the line to be physically robust enough to do this. And there's no messing, because you could be in your squad car in Temple Oak and you will have to deal with anything. So, there are not going to be any passengers in this, shall we say. You will have to prove your physicality further down the line.
Okay, that's interesting, because I was kind of thinking maybe the 50-year-old might be confined to the desk in terms of, dealing with the passport applications and the driving license applications or whatever it is. And then you send the young lad out on the street into Ballymun or Coolock or Finglas to try to take on these gangs. That's not the way it works.
Absolutely not. When you're on the regular, you're on the regular. That's it. So you'll have to put your shoulder to the wheel just like anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's next in the process in terms of, like, obviously it's a bit like the housing crisis in some ways. The government says it's building 30,000 new houses a year, and it'll take an awful lot of more years to kind of get the housing crisis under control. Is it the case the same with the Gardaí, that the Gardaí is under-resourced at the moment, so we'll need a number of years of decent take-up before it's properly resourced?
Yeah, so they want to get to 15,000. So they're saying that the budget last year, the October budget for this year, spoke of 800 to 1,000 recruits. That all sounds fine. But we know that there are approximately 350 retirements every year. We also know that there are probably going to be easily 100, maybe 150, maybe 200 resignations this year. So if there are 800 to 1,000 recruits this year, I would anticipate that would bring the number of guards in the force by the end of this year up to 14,500. But they do want to keep going, and they say that this is going to be an annual recruitment thing. So really, you're probably talking a net increase of, I don't know, somewhere between 400 and 500, 600 guards every year for the next couple of years. And we'll see how high the force goes. But look, they do need more members. The population's getting bigger, so you need more guards.
Yeah, and the key part of that, of course, is the other side. We can't have resignations and retirements, more resignations and retirements than new recruits, as has been happening recently. That's a problem too, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. So, I mean, you gotta get more. If there are more resignations and if there are more retirements, you've got to take that into account and increase the number of recruits. Firstly, if you only match the number of retirements and resignations, you're standing still. So you need to match that, and you need to increase it to step forward and increase the size of the force.
Yeah. Just moving on, there was an intriguing story today, I think it was reported, about Indian cops. They've smashed a massive online scam after receiving a complaint from a woman in an Irish seaside scam. So can you talk us through the details of this, because it takes a bit of explaining?
This is really, really interesting. Essentially, a lady in Dungarvan in County Waterford contacted the Garda Síochána to say that she had received a call from an 083 number of someone claiming to be a phone engineer. Said there was an issue with their phone. Said they were a Stephanie, even though it was a man. It was a man's voice claiming to be a Stephanie. So obviously it was a bogey call. So she contacted the guards. The guards have a thing called mutual assistance. So you can contact Interpol, you can contact Europol, or you can contact the Indian authorities. So the guards contacted the Indian authorities. It's called the Enforcement Department, and they began an investigation. And I had to go and check the geography of this in East India, in Bengal, Bihar, which are two regions, and the city of Kolkata. We used to call it Kolkata. So it's northeast India. And they very quickly began an investigation and identified a place, and they carried out a raid. And there was one fella, they arrested him as he tried to jump out of a window during the search. And hails to the hunt, they effectively found a call centre which was carrying out a massive scam. And essentially what they were doing was they were ringing people in Ireland and Britain, using people with British accents, Indians with British accents, ringing up, pretending to be telephone engineers, saying, you've got an issue with your internet, or you've got an issue with your phone. And they send them a link. We need access to your computer to fix this. And when they did that, they got access to their bank and rifled it. So it was quite sophisticated. What they were doing was they were fleecing these people. There were at least 45 victims, and they were taking the money from their accounts, putting it in to accounts in Ireland and Britain, and then transferring the money from those accounts to India. So it's quite sophisticated. And I think there was something like 80,000 euros seized at the scene and in various bank accounts, loads of mobile phones, loads of computers, and 4 or 5 people have been arrested, including this fella who tried to escape out the window. So it was a big operation. Shows the importance of international cooperation. Also shows the importance of people complaining to the guards, because the guards got the complaint and acted on it. But I just wonder how many other people have fallen victim to this. It was a very sophisticated operation, and I think it's fair to say it's not the only scam operation like this.
Yeah, very interesting investigation or case. Just moving on, I mentioned certain murders, certain missing persons cases that have always resonated with the public, and one of those is the murder of Rachel O'Reilly. She was 30 years old. She had 2 young sons. She was murdered by her husband, Joe O'Reilly. It's a murder that has always resonated with the Irish public. There was a sad development last week when her dad, Jim Callaly, passed away recently. A lot of people would be familiar with having seen him with his wife Rose in terms of appealing for information and then giving interviews in relation to Rachel's murder. Very sad that he passed away.
He was a gentleman. Jim, probably most journalists, national journalists in Dublin would have probably known Jim Callaly. I'd been at their house. They lived in near the Whitehall area in North Dublin. Very accommodating. They suffered two horrible tragedies. Rachel was murdered at her home in Knoll in North Dublin in October 2004, and that set the scene for one of the most compelling murder trials. That was 2007. He was convicted at the end of June 2007. Joe's still in custody. He's convicted unanimously by the jury. Huge case. Covered it myself. And then another sister, Anne, she developed cancer. I think it was 2010, and she died as well. So poor Rose and Jim buried both daughters. So Jim had been unwell for quite some time, and he died. I think it was 10 days ago. So it was a very big funeral. And I just wanted to pay tribute to him because he was very accommodating to any journalist who spoke to him. He really did fight for Rachel, and he was a credit. And so is Rose. They campaigned. They did everything. They never refused to talk to any journalist, and I think they wanted to keep Rachel's memory alive. So look, it's very sad. God love him.
Yeah, it's always one of those things. There's always something very sad about parents burying their son or burying their daughter because it's so unnatural. But when it comes to a horrendous crime, in terms of the horrendous murder of your child, in this case by the wife's husband, there's something terribly, terribly poignant about it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they had to live their grief in the glare of publicity, because murder is never a private crime. This is a public crime, and there is a public interest in it. And as I say, look, we know that Joe and Rose went on the Late Late Show with Pat Kenny, and I think that catapulted it to a higher level. So obviously they were able to grieve to a certain extent privately, but they became public figures. And it's the credit to them that they were always very accommodating. And I think they realized that there was a public interest in this, and they were always very open. So look, I just wanted Rose, send our thoughts to Rose and the rest of the family. There were lots of tributes to him, and I think it would be nice just to add her on, because he was a lovely man who was completely devoted to his family, and he never stopped fighting for Rachel.
Yeah. And I suppose there's two other people I was thinking about when I come to this conversation when I was just looking into it last night. And that is that, of course, Joe and Rachel, they both had two children. They had two sons. I suspect they're probably in their 20s now. So I take it would be very sad for them as well to lose their grandfather, who would have been very loyal to them throughout their own difficult lives.
Yeah, no, I think they're more private people. I won't go into this too much, but they were mentioned in the death notice. So there obviously was a close bond there. Can I just going to change the point slightly? I've been meaning to talk to you about this for a while. You were up in, I think it was County Tyrone, wasn't it?
It was in Mogashel, County Tyrone. Yeah, a small little village in County Tyrone outside Dungannon.
Yes, so I'm Belfast, but sort of my part of the world. So you were up there, and there is a crime interest in this. So it's not politics, and it's not Nordy politics that we were in. You were up there to tell us why you were there.
I was. Basically, what happened was they agreed to go into Stormont. The DUP and Sinn Féin and everybody else decided to bury the hatchet. Well, mainly the DUP decided to bury the hatchet. They came to an agreement with the British government over the Windsor framework and more tinkering with the Windsor framework. For those who aren't familiar with that, that's about post-Brexit trading arrangements. So the DUP decided to end their boycott after 2 years and go into Stormont. But one thing that wasn't, there are certain hardliners who weren't happy at all about this, and they held a public meeting in Mogashel, County Tyrone. So there was about 120 people at it. It was people at it were people like Jamie Bryson, who's a Loyalist activist. There was Jim Allister, who is the leader of the traditional Unionist Voice, which would be known as a hardline Unionist party, more hardline than the DUP or the UUP. So they all came together, and they were strongly resisting the fact that the DUP were going to go back into Stormont. They still think that the union is being kind of undermined by these post-Brexit training arrangements. So it was a very powerful public meeting, very powerful public meeting. Now, there was about 120 at it. I was at it in a journalistic capacity. Everybody else was there in supporting their cause. There was about 120 at it. It was in the Magashel Orange Hall. Yeah, it was quite very interesting.
You were spotted, were you?
I was spotted all right at the start. There was a couple of occasions where when you're a journalist at a public meeting, you are a journalist. You don't really engage in all of the different things that go on at it. But there was a couple of things that was obvious that I was only there as an observer. So the first time was when they all had to, everybody who was opposed to the DUP's climb down, as the people saw it, had to stand up. So, of course, I didn't stand up. I was just a journalist, so I didn't stand up. And then at the very end of the meeting, they all sang the British anthem, God Save the King. And, of course, I couldn't be seen to be standing up and singing God Save the King. And only one man spotted me at the end, and he says, "You're not a king man anyway."
When I was a kid, I used to live for a while in a place called Banbridge in County Down, and we used to go to the cinema. Yeah. I used to go to. I was a wee Catholic from North Belfast, and Banbridge would have been predominantly Protestant. There were Catholics, some Catholics there. There was a Catholic church, but I remember we used to go to the cinema, and we always used to try and sprint out before they played "God Save the Queen." But the reason why I wanted to ask you about this, I'm not talking about those people at this. I'm just talking about loyalism itself.
Mm-hmm.
I am of the belief that there's a significant prospect for serious loyalist violence within the next 5 or 10 years. I mean, it's something that I'm really worried about. It's something that could affect the Republic. I do believe this is, I think the more we head towards United Ireland, I think we're going that road. Loyalism, extreme loyalism, will have to react. And I think it only knows one thing, and that's killing Catholics. So their pressure valve is to start killing Catholics. Now, I'm not talking about those people I'm talking about extreme, terrorists and paramilitaries. Do you not think the threat of loyalist violence in the north, but also down here, is something that has largely been ignored?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a threat of loyalist violence. Like, when you think about it, I always look at it in an overall sense. For the past 25, 26 years, we've had peace in Northern Ireland. It was one of the great achievements of the Good Friday Agreement that we did stop the killing. We stopped all the murder. We stopped all the mayhem. There's now a lot of controversy over Stormont and the kind of outworkings of Brexit. But we stopped the killing. We stopped all the murder. Now, a couple of years ago, before the Queen's death, there was some loyalist activism, I suppose you would call it, and that was loyalist violence. Now, that stopped a couple of years ago. There definitely has to be a concern that there will be more loyalist violence. I think that is a very much a live concern, because there's a small group of people, again, nothing to do with that public meeting, who are very concerned about kind of things up there.
Yeah, and I would contend that the Republic is woefully underprepared for anything. The nightmare scenario, but just people aren't. We live at even Ireland's sort of security analysis. Ireland, because we're the last island in Europe, basically, and next door is America. Everybody sort of thinks, yeah, we live in a benign security thing. Nothing's really going to happen. We'll be grand. And I just fear that there isn't enough, not even planning, but even thinking about what could happen because if you're like me, I'm a 32 countier. I fervently want to see United Ireland. I fervently believe it's coming. People are starting to talk about it, but they're not starting to talk about, well, what could be the side effects in this? In other words, what the loyalists do. There are 12,000 loyalist paramilitaries. 12,000, more than the Defence Forces and the PSNI more than the Defence Forces down here and the PSNI up north put together. 12,000, right? Yeah. And people are just sort of, they're not acknowledging this, or it's not even in anybody's radar. And all I'm saying is, I think it should be, because it could hit the fan in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think the media is partly responsible for that. The media would say that they're only echoing what the public thinks, but I've always been intrigued by the lack of coverage of Northern Ireland in the Republic of Ireland media, that we don't cover Northern Ireland in any great depth. And some editors would say to you, should the people of the Republic have no interest in the North? And I've always had a great interest in the North, but there's not huge coverage of Northern Irish politics or Northern Irish affairs in southern media, to use that phrase.
You're going to get me ranting here, Owen, but that's fine. I've been fortunate enough in my job to go to every village, every town, and every county in the Republic, right? And as you can tell, I'm a Northie. I'm a North Belfast fella. I've never had anti-Northern attitude. Even I do what you call death knocks. It's very stressful. Nobody has ever said, fuck off back to Belfast, you Northie bollocks, if I'm calling about the death of a loved one. So I don't get that anti-Northern sentiment, apart from one group. And I'm sorry to say this, there is most of the anti-Northern sentiment and partitionism or whatever comes from the middle class media. Is that fair? I think it's fair.
Yeah, I remember Matt Cooper, now of Today FM, he was making the point when somebody was saying that the Irish media doesn't give an awful lot of coverage to what goes on in Northern Ireland. And he used to say when he was editor of the Sunday Tribune, it was back probably 20, 30 years ago when he was the editor of the Sunday Tribune, but you put a Northern Irish story on the front page and you'd be guaranteed that your sales would fall in that week. So he would argue that the media is only echoing what the Irish public thinks. Now, I don't know, but there certainly does need to be more of a kind of an awareness of what goes on in the north.
Just even on a political, on a security level, look, this could impact. There obviously have been horrific attacks in '74 in Dublin and Monaghan and Dundalk and Cavan. There've been quite a few attacks. Most commentators down here concentrated on the IRA. Fair enough, that's fine. They were a threat to the state, no problem, and they were much bigger. Killed more people, but there are 12,000 loyalist paramilitaries. A lot of them are involved in drug dealing, but there are people that are still active. And it's just, all I'm saying is that I would hope that the security apparatus in this state is, if not planning, is going, what's that over the horizon? Is there anything that we need to start thinking about? I personally think they do. But anyway, maybe we might talk about that again another day.
Very good. We've covered plenty of topics there, Mick, including politics in Northern Ireland and possible violence in Northern Ireland. So thanks to everybody for listening to another episode of Shattered Lives.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks to you, Owen. Thanks very much.
Thank you.